All right, get ready to dig deep. Because today we're going way back to ancient Egypt, to uncover the fascinating story of Hatshepsut.
A name you might not be familiar with.
Yeah, a name that might not ring a bell right off the bat. But
Yeah.
believe me, this woman's leadership was extraordinary. And since you're all about leadership, get ready for some serious aha moments.
She really did rewrite the rules.
Hmm.
The thing is, inheritance in ancient Egypt usually went through the male line. So for Hatshepsut, who was the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I, to become Pharaoh herself, unheard of.
Okay, so let's break this down. She's royalty, sure, but becoming pharaoh, that's a whole different ballgame. How does she pull that off?
It's a wild story. So after her father dies, she marries her half-brother Thutmose II, who then becomes Pharaoh, which by the way was pretty common back then to consolidate power. When Thutmose II dies, his heir, Thutmose III, was just a kid. So Hatshepsut steps in as a regent ruling on his behalf. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, seems like a logical thing to do, but I'm sensing she didn't stop there.
You got it. Here's where Hatshepsut makes her move. Instead of just advising the young pharaoh, she claims the title of pharaoh for herself. Not queen, not co-ruler, but pharaoh. Totally unprecedented.
Now that's what I call bold. Takes guts to not just climb the ladder, but to build a whole new staircase. But becoming a female pharaoh in ancient Egypt. Talk about a challenge.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Think about it. This is a society steeped in tradition where the role of pharaoh was totally intertwined with masculinity. Hatshepsut had to be strategic.
Hmm.
How did she do it? She starts using the traditional symbols of a male pharaoh. The false beard, the royal kilt, even referring to herself using male pronouns in those official inscriptions.
Hold on, a false beard. Were all the pharaohs sporting those?
Not a chance. This was calculated on Hatshepsut's part. She knew how important perception was. Looking the part to play the part, it was her way of saying, this is what a pharaoh looks like, and I am it.
Pretty savvy. But looking the part only gets you so far. How did she convince the people, especially back then, that a woman was meant to rule?
This is where things get interesting. She uses religion, and she uses it brilliantly. Hatshepsut made it very clear that the gods, and Amun in particular, had chosen her. And get this, there are images from that time that show the gods themselves placing the crown on her head.
Talk about a power move. She knew the importance of good PR even back then, but being pharaoh, it wasn't all appearances and divine endorsements, right? How was her leadership style different from the ones who came before her?
This is what I find fascinating. Unlike her predecessors, who were all about expanding the empire through military campaigns, Hatshepsut was focused on economic growth and cultural development. She understood that true power came from within.
A much more peaceful strategic approach. She was ahead of her time, understanding soft power, centuries before the term existed. Tell me more about that focus on prosperity. What did it look like in action?
One of her most significant moves was reopening trade routes that had been ignored, and she launched an expedition to the land of Punt, that's modern-day Somalia, and returned with riches like gold, incense, even exotic animals.
Hmm.
It wasn't just about the economic boost, it was about showing off Egypt's strength on a global stage.
Smart. It's a win-win. Enrich your kingdom and show everyone you're a force to be reckoned with. That speaks to her vision. And what about those building projects we hear so much about?
They were more than just grand gestures. They were strategic investments in Egypt's future. Take her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, built right into the cliffs on the west bank of the Nile, terraces, colonnades, reliefs, all depicting scenes from her reign. It's considered an architectural wonder even today.
Talk about a leader who knew how to leave a legacy. But even with all those achievements and calculated moves, I can't imagine it was all smooth sailing being a woman in such a patriarchal society.
You're right. Despite her best efforts, there were those who wanted to downplay her role both during and after her reign. It's like some people just couldn't accept a woman at the helm regardless of her success.
It's kind of unbelievable, isn't it? This
Yeah.
woman breaks barriers, leads with incredible vision, and some people still couldn't get past the fact that she was a woman. How did this resistance actually show itself?
It was a lot of things.
Hmm.
During her reign, Hatshepsut constantly had to reaffirm her legitimacy, always making sure everyone knew how prosperous Egypt was under her rule.
Mm.
But there's more to the story. What happened after her death adds a whole other layer of complexity.
Oh, this is where I think things are going to get really interesting. What happened after Hatshepsut died?
Well, you remember Thutmose III, right? Hatshepsut's stepson, the one who was supposed to be pharaoh.
Right.
Let's just say he wasn't too thrilled about having to wait decades to rule.
Yeah.
So after Hatshepsut dies, he goes on a mission basically to erase her from history. Statues defaced, her name chiseled off monuments, inscriptions changed to give credit to him or other male pharaohs for her accomplishments.
Well, talk about holding a grudge. You'd think he would have been grateful for her successful reign. I mean, ultimately, he inherited a much stronger kingdom thanks to her.
It really makes you think, why go to such lengths to erase what she did? It's almost as if he knew that trying to measure up to her legacy was a losing battle. That's how remarkable a leader she was.
You mentioned Hatshepsut constantly having to prove she was the rightful pharaoh. This idea of legitimacy keeps popping up. Can you talk more about that?
Absolutely. So in ancient Egypt, the idea of ma'at was central to a pharaoh's legitimacy. Ma'at represented order, justice, truth, balance, everything a good ruler should stand for.
Okay.
And Hatshepsut was clever. She wove Ma'at into her reign, presenting herself as the one upholding this divine order, even when people questioned her right to rule.
So strategic. By connecting herself to this fundamental principle of Egyptian society, she reinforces her place as the rightful pharaoh. It's like she was playing chess and everyone else was playing checkers.
Exactly. And she didn't just use images and speeches to make this point. She took action. Remember her focus on trade and a thriving economy? By bringing stability and abundance, she showed that her rule was aligned with Ma'at, that it benefited everyone.
Makes sense. Speaking of strategy, we've talked a lot about Hatshepsut's smart use of symbols. What about her connection to the goddess Hathor? I mean, it seems like another smart move, but what was she going for there?
Another example of Hatshepsut's genius, Hathor wasn't just a goddess of beauty and love, she was also closely linked to kingship and power.
Ah, so by linking herself to Hathor, Hatshepsut could tap into a more feminine form of power, one that resonated with traditional beliefs but also subtly challenged the existing patriarchal structure.
Exactly. It shows how skillfully she navigated a world dominated by men. She understood the rules of the game, but wasn't afraid to bend them. She didn't hide her femininity. She embraced it, made it part of her reign.
A powerful message for leaders of any time. It's not about fitting in, it's about having the courage to redefine what leadership means, to bring your whole self to the table.
Absolutely. Authenticity is powerful, and Hatshepsut got that.
So as we dig deeper into Hatshepsut's reign, it's clear her story is anything but straightforward. There's so much more to her.
Exactly. She was a master strategist, a savvy politician, a visionary leader who left an undeniable mark on ancient Egypt.
Speaking of marks, let's talk about her legacy. What do you think are Hatshepsut's most significant contributions? How should we remember her today, despite those attempts to write her out of history?
It's pretty remarkable, isn't it? Despite those attempts, she is anything but forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
On a tangible level, you have her building projects, Der El Bari, just awe-inspiring. But beyond those physical structures, I think her most lasting legacy is the example she set for women, for leaders, for anyone who dares to defy expectations.
He really embodies that saying, well-behaved women seldom make history.
Absolutely. But there's another layer to her legacy that we need to talk about. As much as we've learned about her reign, there's still a certain mystery surrounding Hatshepsut's personal life.
Oh, now you've got my attention. Tell me more about this mysterious side of Hatshepsut. So this personal side of Hatshepsut, this more private side, were historians able to uncover much about that? What kind of insights do we have about her from that perspective?
That's the thing. While we know a lot about Hatshepsut's time as pharaoh, her personal life is still a bit of a mystery.
Okay.
We know she had a daughter, Neferu, but her role, her relationship with Hatshepsut, it seems to go beyond the typical mother-daughter dynamic.
Interesting. Where would you see that?
Well, Nefer held some pretty important titles, like
Mm-hmm.
God's wife of Amun, which was a position usually reserved for only the most powerful women in the kingdom.
Wow.
Some scholars believe that Hatshepsut might have been grooming Nefer for a leadership role, maybe even as pharaoh.
Now that would have been amazing. A female pharaoh making way for her daughter to follow in her footsteps.
Right. It suggests that Hatshepsut wasn't just thinking about her own reign, but about challenging the very foundation of power and inheritance in ancient Egypt.
She was a true visionary. It's like every time we learn something new about Hatshepsut, it just leads to even more questions.
That's what makes studying history so fascinating, especially someone like Hatshepsut. She defied expectations, broke barriers,
Yeah.
and her legacy still inspires us thousands of years later.
She's a shining example of how leadership really can transcend time. I mean, here she is ruling thousands of years ago, but the things we can learn from her are still relevant today.
I completely agree. Her courage, that strategic mind, the way she challenged the status quo and created her own path, Those are qualities that speak to leaders in any era.
As we wrap up this deep dive into Hatshepsut's life, I'm struck by this realization. She reminds us that leadership is not about fitting into a box that already exists. It's about having the guts to redefine that box, rewrite the rules, and leave things better than you found them.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means shaking things up, challenging traditions even if it ruffles some feathers along the way. Hatshepsut's story is a testament to the power of authenticity, vision, and unwavering belief in yourself, even when you're facing incredible opposition.
Powerful stuff. And it makes you wonder what other groundbreaking figures are out there just waiting to be rediscovered in the pages of history. But for now, we have to leave Hatshepsut's story here.
Until our next deep dive.
And to all of you listening, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep searching for those stories of people who dared to lead differently. You never know what you might find.